Who's the murder hobo?
I don't know, but I'm, digging that shirt.
Katie? You're alive.
Clint?
Damn, I got old and ugly. You didn't get ugly, punk.
It's a tale as old as time. Well, not as old as time, but at least about a decade. Publishers and developers choose to release incomplete, disappointing games, using their live service nature as a thin excuse to do so, promising major fixes and significant and prolonged post-launch support. In these cases, one of two things ends up happening. Either these games actually do get the kind of fixes and improvements that are promised and make remarkable recoveries like Rainbow Six Siege, Battlefront 2, and Sea of Thieves have done. Or these games end up bombing, both critically and commercially, so badly that the people behind them just decide to cut their losses and run, abandoning all plans and roadmaps for post-launch support. Not going to name any names here, but one major recent example rhymes with Anthem. Before we go ahead, please consider subscribing to our channel. We upload new videos every single day, and your support really helps us out. With that out of the way, let's start. Which of the two major categories Marvel's Avengers falls in still remains to be seen. Perhaps it's still a bit early to definitively answer that question one way or the other. But based on how Operation Hawkeye, Future Imperfect has turned out, it seems right now like it's going to fall into the second category. Whether or not kicking off the game's post-launch life with two Hawkeye characters right off the bat was a good idea is an entirely different discussion. It wasn't. Even putting that aside, this newest DLC is a major disappointment. Rather than addressing some of the biggest issues that have plagued Marvel's Avengers since launch, Future Imperfect instead checks the box of delivering more content, while making many of the same mistakes that the base game did when it came out. Operation Hawkeye Future Imperfect picks up where the Kate Bishop DLC left off. Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye, is back after a prolonged absence, rescued by the Avengers from his reluctant partnership with Monica as he tries to track down the missing Nick Fury in the future to stop a world-ending Kree invasion and prevent the apocalypse from ever happening. What follows is a journey through time, while the Avengers, now with Hawkeye back in their ranks, continue the search for Fury. From a narrative perspective, Future Imperfect feels like a case of wasted potential. The exciting thing about having this massive roster of iconic superheroes is that every time one of them joins in, you get to see them interacting with all of the others, see their friendships and rivalries, their dynamics, and their past of their relationships. Except here, that's far from the case. We get to see plenty of Hawkeye and Kate Bishop in this DLC, and the relationship between the two is surely written into the story well enough. But Future Imperfect ends up ignoring the rest of the cast almost entirely. The other characters barely ever have anything to say, barely have any real involvement in the story, which means Hawkeye's re-entry into the Avengers doesn't feel nearly as impactful as it should have. The overarching narrative fares slightly better, especially towards the latter half of the expansion, but it's all over too quickly. The fact that it ends on a cliffhanger isn't really surprising, given the fact that Crystal Dynamics are looking to tell a larger plot over the course of multiple expansions released at a steady cadence. But at just about a couple of hours long, Future Imperfect feels too short. Interesting plot points, such as how Old Man Hawkeye has been living in the post-apocalypse for so long, or the entire character of Maestro, don't get nearly as much time in the sun as they should have, and instead end up feeling disappointingly underutilized. Future Imperfect also adds a whole new biome to the game with a post-apocalyptic future wasteland, but that too falls way short of expectations, mostly because it makes the same mistakes that the environments in the base game did. It's a fairly large environment, but it feels so dull and uninteresting. There's very little to do, almost no reason to go exploring, almost nothing interesting to see and find. The only reward for your curiosity and for exploring is more repetitive combat, followed by boring loot and resource pickups from chests. Worst of all, the wasteland feels a bit too much like a reskin of the Utah Badlands. Visually, it's got its own thing going on, but any and all changes you see are purely aesthetic, which means not only is this new location a poorly designed and uninteresting one, it's not even all that new. And it's not like Future Imperfect compensates for that with interesting missions, which are still as repetitive and by the numbers as ever. You still either track something down and hold square in front of it for a few seconds, or fight waves of aimbots or sci-fi mercenaries. It's all just so uninspired, which is a real shame, because these are the exact issues that plagued the base game as well. Marvel's Avengers was weighed down by bland environments and bland mission design, and rather than looking to fix that, its DLC has just delivered more of that stuff. And that complete lack of understanding of the game's biggest issues is evident in other areas as well. The best cosmetics are still too costly. The repeatable content is still boring and excessively grindy. It's all a bit frustrating, honestly, like the developers didn't understand what the issues are that people have with this game. Now, I do want to give credit where it's due. Playing as Hawkeye is a lot of fun. Traversal feels a bit wonky, but when it comes to combat, he's a really fun character to play as. Equipped with a katana and, of course, a bow, he strikes a perfect balance between ranged and melee combat. His hits feel punchy and land with solid impact. The moves that you unlock in his skill tree are all pretty interesting. Chaining them together and performing combos feels satisfying. He can fire 3 different types of arrows, which means there's plenty of variety even if you use him purely as a ranged character. While he's also perhaps the only character in the roster right now who has a legitimately useful healing ability, which means he's not just fun to play as, he can also be useful in a pinch. The core of the Hawkeye character from a gameplay perspective is solid as a rock. It's just a shame that everything else around it is so flimsy.
You know why I'm still here? Because I'm the strongest there is!
You better appreciate this, Fury!
Crystal Dynamics were probably hoping that a chunk of new content to engage with would be enough to keep players satisfied. And while a lack of content is an issue with Marvel's Avengers, it's far from the only issue. Future Imperfect does offer new content, but that new content is as riddled with problems and as mediocre as the content that preceded it. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from Gaming Bolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.